the challenge that you run into with the corporate equality index or the CEI survey is that oftentimes it elevates one group at the expense of another.
Hi again, everybody. Welcome back to The Narrative. Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, David Mahan joining you today. Actually, we don't know where David is. Looks like he's in a hunting lodge.
He's got a blurred background right now. That's the one way of, making it. I think David's doing pulling off what he did with the summit again, being like, oh, I don't feel good, guys. And then I'm pretty sure he just unblurred. I think he's at his hunting cabin right now. So
I've got a septic man that's coming out.
What did you do there, sir?
If you really must know.
Oh man.
Well, that's a great transition into the election.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a septic man.
Transition.
All
Yeah.
of the sewage that we need to get rid of. We're less than a week away from being done with the political ads, from the text messages, from the junk mail in the mailbox.
Right.
Just how are we feeling heading up to next Tuesday, guys?
I gotta say, I've been not feeling great. I feel weird because I'm not used to feeling good about a presidential election outcome, right? This is not a feeling I'm used to about where I feel like this election is going for conservatives, for people who really care about freedom and children. Things are really. I feel like going pretty well right now when I look at both at the presidential race and the U.S. Senate race in particular. I mean, the other side of that too, that is really surprising me is I feel really good about. I don't want to say really good. I feel like we have a shot to defeat issue one, the constitutional amendment, the redistricting amendment. I know, David. I know has been talking to a number of lawmakers recently. We're getting ready for the big sort of lame duck push. So the time when the lawmakers come back after the election. But David, I don't know about you. We haven't talked about this yet. When I'm talking to members, they're telling us when they're out in their communities, they're seeing folks say, "Hey, this redistricting amendment is a bad idea." What's your read on it, David?
They've been extremely encouraging. Even at all the GOP events I've been to, but besides that, the churches, folks have been like, yeah, I already voted. I voted no. So I'm hearing a lot of good things, but, I always have last year's issue one in the back of my mind where I was hearing a lot of good things there too. I just put it in the Lord's hands, but folks are hearing the no message. And that was my biggest concern when you look at the disparity between what, the yes side raised versus the no side. Just in general, guys, I just need to get this whole federal election over so that we can get the statewide guys back to the state house and we can get this work done.
Right.
It would be good to see you get some work done again.
Yeah, exactly. It's been about 5 months since David has done any work. I think that's
how much napping can one man do?
Honestly, I think we saw this. I think twofold. We saw this a little bit last year on the 60%, where folks were confused by the issue, and that worked against us. For the good guys, I'd say. I think on this one, you are seeing a little bit of that of folks. And honestly, I will tell you that's the intent of the people that wrote this gerrymandering amendment. It is such a complex bureaucracy. We really tried to convey that in our issue one explainer piece we did of like, listen, there's 4 different levels of bureaucracy that are created in this constitutional amendment. They created all of this confusion so that they can do whatever they want if they win. But I think it's actually backfiring on them. And there's been some really good, the ballot language actually is pretty descriptive of what it actually is doing. And so, yeah, I again, 33 million, I think is the number now that the other side has, and more than 90% of that coming in from out of the state. Again, can somebody please explain to me why Steven Spielberg cares about how the House district in Tuscarawas County is drawn, right? It makes no sense whatsoever. But that's who's funding this effort, along with foreign billionaires and all this other crazy stuff. But credit to Bob Paduchik, who's running the No campaign, and people like Matt Huffman and Rob McCauley, who have really been out there spreading the word on it, that have exposed what this has done. So even with the significant cash disadvantage, I'm not willing to sit here and say it's going down. What I am saying is there's a shot that it could, and it's going to be up to folks to turn out to vote.
And shout out to Mike, man. I mean, the clarity of that piece that you all put out, in the comms department. I mean, even this morning, I've had two pastors today reach out and ask me about issue 1, and I send them just the back page of that thing, and just instantly they're like, "Wow, okay, this is clear." So thanks, man. I appreciate you guys taking my advice on the layout and design of that piece.
Where's the mute button?
Really, all that hard work there. Yeah.
Well, BuckeyeBallot.com/issue1 for more information. If you want to spread that around over the next couple of days, by the time this show comes out, we only have about 4 days to the election. So get that information out as widely as possible leading up to Election Day. Well,
and hopefully, based off of some of these early voting numbers, I think a lot of our listeners have probably already voted, is what we're seeing. Not that we can see how our listeners are voting, but the trends would suggest, sorry, we are not Big Brother tracking how you vote. But the trends would suggest
you does
exactly. Yeah, sorry. Wait, once you click subscribe, we got you for life. Anyway, but the trends of early voting look really good right now. Mike, I know you have those numbers.
Yeah, I'm looking at them right now on the dashboard that the Secretary of State's website has put out. Almost 2.3 million ballots requested or early votes cast in person, and they've seen, as far as returns go or in-person votes, 1.95,
wow.
almost 2 million votes, and we're still, a week or so out from Election Day. That's unprecedented in terms of early voting numbers.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I think that 22, the highest we had was about 1.5 million total before the election. I know my wife went to go vote early this week, and it was probably a 40-minute line at the Franklin County polling location or Board of Elections. And actually, while she was in line, she saw our pastor show up to go vote, and we were like, "Yeah, there we go, guys. We're doing the thing here today." And I mean, the thing that really shocked me in all of that is the advantage Republicans have over Democrats right now. I mean, it's hundreds of thousands of votes, which is different, right? That's not normal. And again, that you can't bank on that meaning anything in particular. But it is different than what you would typically see. And I got to say, to this early voting side of things, the longer I work on elections, the more I'm falling into the Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy camp of let's move to a single day in-person, paper ballot election process. I'll say in particular, when I hear people like Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, who, these are two guys that have, Elon in particular, have really strong connections in the tech world. Elon was sort of in the ground levels of AI. And when you hear guys that see what's going on with AI today being like, hey, we need to really think big picture about how we do our election, that's a red flag to me of like, okay, we really got to look at this. All that being said, these are the rules we have right now. And, I do feel confident in Ohio in particular in these rules being a fair election. So let's play by these rules. Let's use all of the levers we have right now to drive votes out to get a good outcome, and then win so that we can secure elections for the future. It literally is when we're going out and talking, David, again, I don't know about what you're seeing, Mike, and you're doing more talking at churches as well. If it's not the first question I get, it's the second question I get is this going to be a fair election?
Oh, for sure. It's on the back of everybody's mind with, the fires and the boxes here recently, and each side is blaming the other. It is a concern of mine as well. Just, I think the other day in prayer, we just talked about regardless of which way the election goes, Father, we just pray for peace in our land, because it is there's a lot of money. I think Kamala, her campaign, this was like a week ago, had spent over $1 billion just since they put Biden in the closet and put her on the platform. $1 billion, right?
I thought he was in the basement.
Huh?
Different connotation, man.
Hey, but I wanted to say this, man. So you brought up Elon Did y'all see him in that gold Trump hat? I mean, with all the money between Elon and Trump, I mean, you think they'd be able to find a good fitted. These hats are some of the most lame.
Don't act like you didn't order the gold Trump sneakers, David. Come on.
Yeah,
We have one
the MAGA fat
Republican
laces
fitted hat manufacturer in the geo.
You're not wrong, though. I do want to affirm you in that. It is a rough look. Well, I'll just say, I know I voted early for a while now, and I live in a more rural district up in Knox County, so it leans very, very conservative up there. And for a couple of years, it was a ghost town during early voting. But this year, I went twice. I didn't vote twice. I'm not a Democrat, not trying to get two votes in. But I took my daughter to vote once. So it was her first year that she can vote in a presidential election. And
Isn't she like 12?
I had already voted, but both times parking lot was full, pretty steady line of people going in and out, not necessarily a wait, but to see that in a very conservative area like Knox County, I think Republicans are kind of getting the idea of it's not necessarily a bad thing to get your vote in early.
Oh yeah, no, that's right. That's right.
Well, it's going to be a big day, and certainly, talking about issue one, the other thing that we want to mention too, in terms of the election, is that the down ballot stuff really does matter in this.
Oh, yeah.
We've talked about the Supreme Court justices a number of times, and one of the reasons we can really highlight that, unfortunately, is what we saw come out of Hamilton County with the heartbeat bill officially being struck down by an elected judge there in Hamilton County Common Pleas Court.
Yeah, and I do want to say, I just want to acknowledge, like, we've had some pretty terrible decisions, especially out of Hamilton County courts. And there's aspects of this decision that were unbelievably unprofessional from this judge. The reality is, with the abortion amendment, though, we knew that gestational limits on abortion prior to viability would be almost impossible to have upheld, right? Mm-hmm. However, there's a lot of other issues going on with this. But I think that the biggest thing to me about this decision that came out, and I ended up talking all over the place on this decision with folks, is that, this is the beginning of the exposure of what the abortion amendment really was, right? Because you saw all of these ads about rape and incest, about just really difficult, complications, what was the new phrase they came up with? Miscarriage care, right? Like, we're going to protect miscarriage care, right? Well, okay, so now you just had a court decision that strikes down the law that would stop late-term abortions happening, right? Even if you're not with us on life of conception or even heartbeat, abortions at 20 weeks are very real. And this is something I've been talking about this more and more lately, but we're going to put out some numbers on this probably going into the new year. But you look at the reality of 22,000 abortions last year in Ohio. That means 1 in 7 children conceived in Ohio in 2023 was aborted. Think about that. I mean, 1 in 7. It's much greater than, and that is before the full effect of the abortion amendment, right? That's really, 8 weeks, 7 weeks worth of it, and really the abortion clinics hadn't ramped up to that point. So we're going to get full numbers on that going forward. And, when the prayer is, as voters start to see the devastation, we can say, okay, we need to walk back from this cliff that we've walked off of. So, yeah.
Well, it's going to be a big week in our state and nation. Next week, we'll be back on the narrative to talk about whatever happens.
Might even do we haven't talked about this yet, but we might even do like an emergency podcast on Wednesday, depending on how fiery, how much pumpkin spice I've had that Wednesday morning.
Is it still pumpkin spice season?
It's still, listen,
just gross.
Until they bring their weird Christmas drinks out, that's when I'm done. But
yeah, see, that's Mike's season. Peppermint mocha season is Mike's season.
Oh, there you go. We'll pass the torch.
Pass the baton, yeah. But we are going to preview the election a little bit more coming up with Daniel Cameron from the 1792 Exchange. It's going to be a great conversation, and we're going to get into corporate equality index in addition to his perspective on the presidential race specifically. So great conversation with Daniel coming up. Hope you'll stick around for it here on The Narrative. Hey, Narrative listeners. Christians in the marketplace today face more unique and challenging threats than ever before. Businesses are following woke capitalism, chambers of commerce are beholden to social justice, and secular activists are chipping away Christians' First Amendment rights. As Ohio's only Christian chamber of commerce, the Christian Business Partnership stands in the gap to advocate for, to educate, and to celebrate Christian business owners. Joining the partnership also allows businesses to provide their employees with healthcare insurance, workers' compensation, and exclusive banking and educational discounts. To find out more and to join, go to cbpohio.org. That's cbpohio.org. We are back on The Narrative. Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, David Mahan. Pleased to be joined now by Daniel Cameron, who is the CEO of the 1792 Exchange, which is working to protect free exercise, free speech, and free enterprise, and help American corporations return to the winning formula of producing great products and services, not pushing agendas. Daniel previously served as the 51st Attorney General of Kentucky from 2019 to 2023. He was the first Black American elected to a standalone statewide office in Kentucky's history. He then went on to win the Republican nomination for governor of Kentucky. He grew up in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, and now proudly calls Louisville home with his wife and their 2 sons. Daniel, it is so great to have you on The Narrative. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Mike, Aaron, thank you guys. Really appreciate it. David, pleasure to be with you too. Yeah, thank you all. I'm happy to be here. Only note I will make is that as just a few weeks ago, we moved to a county over from Jefferson County. So we're Oldham County residents. Now we got a little creek that runs behind our house.
Out in the suburbs.
That our kids are just loving. And I only kid, but yeah, we're enjoying being out here in Oldham County. And my parents, or I should say my wife's parents, are down the street from us. So we've got built-in childcare now. So
nice,
man.
Things are good. Things are good.
Yeah. Well, and you're speaking David and Mike's language here, because CCV goes and buys this building downtown Columbus, and they just try to move as far away from Columbus as possible. I'm still the only Columbus resident city dweller in this podcast here, but you know, Daniel, we've been wanting to get together to chat about all things going on with corporate America today, particularly with our nationwide's Not On Your Side campaign. But we can't have you a few days before the election and not just get your thoughts on how things are looking. I mean, let's just start big picture. You know President Trump. You've done campaign events with him. You've been in that world, both as Attorney General and as a Senate candidate, or a governor's candidate there. Wanted to get your thoughts on how things are looking in the country, how the Trump campaign is looking, what you think we need to be looking at going into Tuesday.
Man, I honestly believe that there is a very serious movement that is taking hold of this nation right now, and it's one that is built largely on the idea of free First Amendment principles, whether it's freedom of religion, free speech, free exercise of religion, that has found its way to the grand old party, if you will, and has found its way in the voice of Donald Trump and through millions of folks that have decided that they're going to vote for him come November 5th. And it's an amazing moment. I take a step back and sort of try to observe as objectively as I possibly can. And what I think I've discovered this time that is different from 2016 is like it is almost fashionable to be a Trump supporter and a Trump person who connects to the GOP or the Republican Party. And I think that's aided by sort of this cultural idea that we got to get back to normal or some level of sanity and be okay with one proclaiming the name of Jesus Christ and not feeling that you're going to get thrown out of an event or something, or standing tall for.
I feel like you're at the wrong rally.
Yeah,
right?
Wrong rally, or like standing tall for first principles and being okay with that. And I think Trump has largely put his finger on the pulse of that. And, he's got a good team around him, which, one of which is one of your folks from Ohio, JD Vance.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm excited about this moment. Again, I try to look at it as objectively as possible, and feel that, President Trump's going to have a good day. And also the counter here is, if you will, or is that there was a moment when, Joe Biden, which I tell people this all the time, Joe Biden was forced out of the race by a Kentuckian named George Clooney. The whole thing had sort of died down, and then George Clooney writes this article saying, "Oh, by the way, I threw this big event for Joe Biden, and he's not the same Joe Biden he was 3 years ago." And then all of a sudden, the cascade just sort of took off from there. And so, there was a moment there where Kamala Harris, because she was new, because kind of not really vetted since she'd run for president in 2020, and forget all the borders are stuff, forget all the terrible things she had done as vice president. Let's pretend that let's pretend that we're all have been told by a magician that the last 4 years disappear. So we'll pretend she's new. And for about a week, the media, and they tried to convince folks that, she was new and she was different and she was the change agent. And they did this on her behalf because she never really had to speak. And then when she had to start talking and engaging with the press and engaging in sort of more public forums, that sheen quickly wore off. And now you're stuck on the Democratic side with a candidate who goes on The View, a very safe space, and cannot think of a thing she would do differently from the current administration, even though the current administration has brought you sky high inflation, made it harder for you to buy gas and groceries. And even though they told you for like 2 years that the crime numbers and violent crime in particular had gone down, they had to revise those numbers, and you find out they're lying to you. So crime has actually gone up. And then you think about a border, again, that she was namely put in charge of, that is not secure.
Right.
And these are the things that administration has done for you. And you argue that you're the change agent, but you can't tell folks anything that you would have done differently.
That you'd actually change, right?
Yeah, that's not an inspiring campaign. And
No.
I think most folks have figured that out. And which is why, I think I at this point, I don't know if Joe Biden is trying to actively sabotage Kamala. Honestly,
If he's aware of what he's saying, but yeah.
Yesterday was just icing on the cake in terms of he's counter programming her during the middle of the day, and then he just throws this bomb out there with this comment about So, anyways, I think the Democratic Party is in disarray, and I suspect they probably have some buyer's remorse on their decision to, essentially stage a coup and remove Joe Biden and give folks Kamala Harris without a vote being cast, mind you.
Yeah.
So, anyways, I think that come November 5th, we're obviously going to have a new president one way or the other, but I think it's going to be Donald J. Trump.
Daniel, as we're talking about this cultural moment we're in, Kamala initially had the Kamala effect of, the polling was going her way. The money was coming in hand over fist. She's raised like $1 billion or whatever, just to, basically about to lose. But one of the things I kept hearing people say culturally was that she would bring in, the African-American vote that was kind of diminishing amongst the Biden camp. And what we're seeing is exactly the opposite. She's got like half the polling numbers that Obama enjoyed. And what would you think that the reason or the cause of that would be?
It is really interesting. I mean, if the polling holds up, President Trump is going to do the best with the Black community since a Republican nominee in 1960.
That's right.
And it's an amazing moment where, the media gives Donald Trump all sorts of grief. They sort of, criticize him for everything.
Fascist Hitler.
And all sorts of things. And what has been amazing is that Donald Trump and JD Vance, they will go anywhere and talk to anybody. And this is actually something that I think started with Trump in 2016, and he has continued to sort of press on this part of the discussion, which is, as the Black community, what has being loyal to the Democratic Party gotten you? And he started that conversation in 2016, and he continues to beat that drum over and over again. And I think it's resonating with people.
That's right.
They're finally sort of catching up to the idea that, you know, there's some legitimacy to this idea that you know, we've been voting a certain way for a long period of time, and nothing in our communities has changed. We still care about a good paying jobs. We still care about safe streets and communities. And neither one of those things has improved under Democratic leadership in a lot of these cities. And then nothing has happened writ large in terms of Democratic from the Democratic Party over a period of years. And I think a lot of folks are waking up to that and saying, you know, let's give somebody else a shot. And Donald Trump, you know, has, again, this cultural moment where he, you know, can have these conversations, has been engaged in these conversations for a number of years now, and I think it's paying off. And
that's right.
I'm excited to see it, and I'm hopeful that, you know, the trends that we're seeing in the polling hold up come election day, and when they're counting the votes.
Well, your George Clooney comment, Daniel, reminded me of a meme I saw last week that said, after Trump did the Rogan podcast, that is second to our podcast in terms of overall impact, but you know, it's up there. He's got a good one going. But
go lie, Aaron Baer.
We're going to be breaking, you know, like Apple, you know, or iTunes here soon.
Exactly.
Break the internet here. Yeah.
All types of records. That said, you know, imagine 15 years ago if somebody would have told you that the guy from The Apprentice and the guy from Fear Factor would be having the most important political conversation in the country, right? And then throw into that the guy from ER would be kicking a presidential candidate out of the race, right? Like
it's remarkable. I mean, I you know, Joe Biden had done a pretty good job of sort of tamping down sort of the external sort of pressure. And then all of a sudden, which there's just a great irony there, but all of a sudden, George Clooney writes this op-ed in the LA Times or wherever he wrote it. And that just like busted it out into the open again. And
Ocean's 14, the next great heist.
Ocean's 24,
there you go.
Yeah. Only Danny Ocean can pull that.
Danny Ocean can do that. But to that, to your point though about, I mean, even the podcast, but in particular, thinking about JD Vance, and honestly, Daniel, I'd put you in this category. I'd put our you know, friend of the podcast, Vivek Ramaswamy, into this conversation. You know, there does, you watch JD in particular in this election, and Trump again is a force unto himself. You know, I'll say every candidate you've seen that has tried to emulate Trump, be like Trump, it's just blown up in your face. He is literally a one of one. Right. Just in terms of his backstory, his personality, the force of presence that he is. But you do see something happening with JD that there is a move coming of, you know, somebody who is able to go and has a great mastery of the issues and talk in any environment. I listened to his entire podcast with Theo Vaughn, which again, I'll just say to listeners of The Narrative, just be aware there's language and things like that in there that you won't hear on our podcast, except for, you know, when David gets mad. But you saw this Christian man just sit down and talk like a person.
Yeah.
Right. And again, I've seen you handle interviews that way. You see Vivek do this where, you know, they're not overly messaged, not overly trying to prove anything, but just be reasonable. Yeah. And by the end of the interview, you see these guys, just people like Theo Vaughn, who's not a believer, and, you know, probably isn't with us on, you know, that it's wrong to tear a child apart limb from limb. but is with us on some common sense things. And what's that movement you see happening? What do you see JD that's doing that's different that you think is can be something that does carry on to other candidates in the future?
Man, I think you've nailed it. It's all about authenticity, and people just want to see the real, and they want to, understand you as a person. And that's what I've appreciated about JD is that, like, he will go into any environment, and it doesn't care. It doesn't matter if it's Jake Tapper or Theo Vaughn, or any Sunday morning host. I mean, the whole thing with Martha Raddatz. I mean, that was absolutely. I mean, that was pure gold because to an extent, people have their talking points and they're sort of canned. And I think JD sort of challenged that narrative, which is like, you listen to yourself, like listen to what you are saying. It is nonsensical to think that like it's okay for some invasion of our country to occupy, or some Venezuelan gang to occupy 2 or 3 apartment buildings in a town. Like you think that's acceptable? And I just really appreciate the realness with which he comes at issues, and he's bold. I mean, that's whether it's JD and his relationship, with faith and Christ, or us, as believers. I mean, we're called to be bold and called to, take action, and called to be engaged in the public arena as Christians. And I appreciate him wearing, or showing the full range of emotions. I mean, the idea that he, would go into a town hall forum and talk about the fact that, like, you shouldn't lose friendships over politics. I'm a wrestling man, and so look, maybe a couple of nights ago, Mick Foley, who some of you all might know as Mankind, he was on CNN or something. He actually talked about it. He I think Mick Foley is supporting Kamala Harris. And then you got The Undertaker and Kane, who are supporting Donald Trump. And I think the host asked Mick Foley about it. And Mick Foley said, at the end of the day, Taker and Kane are still my friends. We might not agree politically. And that was the point that JD was making, is that, look, you shouldn't lose friends over politics. But I think we have to be bold and courageous and step up to the plate. And that's what I think is attracting people to President Trump, and to
don't forget Hulk Hogan and all the Hulkamaniacs out there.
Look, as I told somebody, I was on Fox Business with Stuart Varney a couple of weeks ago. And as I said to him, whether you're Waka Flocka Flame or Hulk Hogan, there's room in the GOP for you. And,
that's right. I was going to say, Hulk Hogan and probably Andre the Giant or David's generation. We're more
absolutely.
We're attitude generation.
Exactly. Yeah. We anyway.
And Mick
Foley made a man out of
friends with a guy who threw him off of a steel cage.
There you go.
Thumbtacks. Make a man out of you.
Well, as you mentioned, the authenticity piece, Daniel, that's something I think that has really stood out to me as I watch President Trump and JD Vance. They have this way of being who they are without patronizing to the people that they're talking to. Mm-hmm. And they can really articulate, I think, what a lot of people feel on the inside. And when you hear somebody stand up and articulate what you believe in such clear terms, it's what's motivating a lot of the movement, at least from my perspective. Because the other side of that then is you see more of the pandering side of, I'm going to tell you what you want to hear in the voice that I think you want to hear.
Exactly.
So I'm going to debut this new accent today. And you can tell that there's that divide between, are you just saying what you're saying, what you think I want to hear, or are you saying actually something that comes from your core beliefs? And I think that has become apparent over these last few weeks of the campaign trail.
Yeah, Michael, I agree with you. I mean, again, it's back to this idea of like, who's authentic. And I mean, you got Kamala on one side, which you don't really know what she believes, because she flips it and changes it sort of, daily. And then you've got Trump, who will say what is on his mind and says it in his way. and it resonates with people because they want the real. They want the authentic. And that's something that he and JD have brought to the table, and is why so many people, I mean, there is a reason that President Trump was so successful in 2016, and it's because he resonated with folks who were tired of sort of the inauthentic, or folks that hadn't necessarily they would say one thing and then not do it once in office, and people just got tired of it. And he represented a break from that system. And again, I think we're in a better position in terms of sort of authenticity than we've been in a long time.
Yeah, we want to believe somebody can go from fry cook at McDonald's one month to president the next. That's what we really want to see as the American story.
Just when we start to class it up, Daniel, he's got to say stuff like that. Before we switch gears here, there are some people that are still stuck on the personality thing. Like I like Vance's personality. I like the authenticity of Trump, whether you like what authenticity looks like with him or not. He is authentic. He does what he says he's going to do. But there are still a lot of people, when I'm talking to just folks in the community, like yesterday, we had a conversation, beef tenderloin, $160 at the store, right? Like the cost of chicken, the cost of toilet paper, everything's gone up. We all love to talk about that. But then when we ask them, are you voting? Right? Are you voting early? Are you voting period? It's, I don't like politics. But I love, put your governor hat on real quick. And tell us, when we look at all these economic factors to our personal finances, rarely do we make the connection of energy independence. Rarely do we make the connection with foreign affairs. Right. What would you say to the person who's still out there, maybe some of the independents, I just don't know if I want to wade in on this. What would you say about this election that's going to impact their personal finances?
Man, David, I would tell them in all honesty, think back to where we were 4 years ago, pre-COVID, and where our economic condition was. I mean, at the time before pre-COVID, we were we had a record-setting economy. Quite frankly, the economy had never been better in this nation's history.
That's right.
So you had more money in your pocket. You felt safer. And oh, by the way, we weren't involved in so many foreign entanglements. That's another feature of the Trump administration, is that the old notion that there's peace through strength is a real thing, because during his tenure, we weren't engaged in all of these conflicts that we certainly see today. Yeah. And so I just asked people to revisit where they were before you had a Biden administration that sold you on the Inflation Reduction Act, but actually increased inflation, made it harder for you to buy these goods. And, I get your point about personality. But, as I'm often reminded, none of us are, none of us are perfect. There was only one perfect man, and his name is Jesus. And we all fall short of that standard daily. And so when you look for a political candidate, I think the important thing to focus on is, where were we 4 years ago? Where were we prior to COVID?
That's right.
We were in strong economic standing. We were respected abroad, and we didn't have all these foreign entanglements. And that's what we're trying to get back to. That's why this idea of making America great again is pretty spot on. Is that we were in a good spot before the Biden administration. Let's get back to that. And that's what I think I try to tell folks as well. Is like, you don't have to. This isn't like theory. We saw.
Yes, we got history.
Yeah, we saw the economic boom, if you will, that we lived under in the prior Trump administration. Let's get back to that. Let's leave behind this very disappointing 4 years that we've seen in terms of the economic health and prosperity of our families.
I think the problem is like there's really no measurement for how safe we feel, right? Nobody was talking about how safe we felt 4 years ago. Nobody was talking about how low the gas prices were. But it's when things start tipping the other way, right? When the gas prices go up, and when we're not feeling safe, and our kids can't buy homes anymore, that's when we start talking about the issue. And so, yeah, I appreciate that perspective.
So, Daniel, I want to kind of shift a little bit here. staying in this lane about what's going on with the election, but to what you're doing now with 1792 exchange. And, I think one of actually, we had a board meeting not too long ago here at CCV, and one of my board members made the comment in regard to our nationwide Not On Your Side campaign that really the lines between corporate America and the government have really blurred a lot, right? And we're seeing this bigger, especially leftward force in corporate America today than ever before. What is as you guys are interacting with the C-suites and publicly traded companies and privately held companies, and you're tracking what big corporate America is doing? How are they looking at this election? How are they thinking about Trump and Kamala, and what it would mean for the next 4 years?
Yeah, it's really interesting that I think a lot of big business, they tend to keep their cards close to the vest. And the reason they do that is because they don't want to sort of upset whoever might ultimately be in charge. But what I'm convinced of, and what I know of anecdotally, is a lot of C-suite and execs in some of our biggest corporations and some of our privately held as well. They want to focus on business. Like, they don't want to sort of have to think through sort of all these different iterations of social engineering that the government sort of tried to force on them as laboratories for social engineering. Like, they want to focus on business. I mean, I mention pretty regularly this phrase that came from a speech that Calvin Coolidge gave when he was president, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but it basically was this idea that the business of America is business. And sadly, that idea has sort of left corporate America because they've just been bombarded by big government that has tried to create these onerous conditions and regulations to sort of create social engineering. And then that, in conjunction with sort of these far left groups, have like made it impossible for a CEO to wake up in the morning and just think about business. Like, they think about business. They think about, how can we placate all of these far left interest groups? How can we placate, the human rights campaign? How do we make sure the current administration, the Biden administration, who's creating these onerous conditions, how do we placate them? And I think that it will be quite refreshing for when there's a new administration in the Trump administration that can unwind some of these executive orders. I mean, as an attorney general, and several of my colleagues now are still fighting the Biden administration on a whole host of issues that in which they've tried to create a regulatory landscape that is just onerous for business and onerous for nonprofits and onerous for foster care agencies, and particularly if you're an agency or an adoption agency of faith. I know it will be refreshing when with the stroke of a pen, if you will, the Trump administration is going to be able to unwind a lot of those things that the Biden administration was doing. So it's a moment that I think that a lot of CEOs and leadership are looking forward to. And there's already some courageous, I talk about boldness all the time. I mean, there are already some courageous CEOs that have made the decision to sort of get back to neutrality. I mean, at 1792 exchange, that's what we focus on, right? Is getting corporations back to or moving them back to neutral, or what I oftentimes refer to as moving them back to sanity and just common sense. A lot of that's going to be aided by having a new administration in, but there have been, again, bold leaders here as of late that have said, you know what, we don't have to bend the knee to a far left interest group. We can treat people well. We can treat our employees well. We can treat our customers well without bending the knee to, HRC or any other far left organization. We don't have to fill out a survey to treat people well. And there've now been what, 10 companies that have been courageous on
Yeah,
that.
that's where I want to go to here, Daniel. Just to that end, that we've seen it was like this snowball effect, right? I think it started with Tractor Supply,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden John Deere and Harley Davidson and Caterpillar and Ford, and then I think Toyota is the most recent one. All of these companies that were pretty woke companies that a lot of them had very conservative customer bases have started bailing on their DEI policies, saying we're no longer participate in the Corporate Equality Index. Maybe first, Daniel, if you could explain what the Corporate Equality Index is, and then would just love to hear again from 1792. You guys are having really high level conversations all over the country. What changed? Why now all of a sudden is all of this happening?
Well, so for your listeners, the Human Rights Campaign issues yearly what's called the Corporate Equality Index. And it's essentially a survey that they put forth. And it tells you got to do more and more woke things in order to get a good score, to stay in good standing with the Human Rights Campaign, which is ultimately, in many ways, meant that you get companies like Target putting tuck-friendly bathing suits in the front of their store, or you get Bud Light doing ads with Dylan Mulvaney, or you get the corporate community to give $87 billion or pledge $87 billion to Black Lives Matter. I bring up Target and Bud Light often because the two of them together, those two organizations lost $27 billion. And then you think of the fact that Bud Light, I think, might have dropped to third in terms of their market share and might never recover.
Wow.
Those are pretty staggering because at the end of the day, a lot of businesses want to focus on the dollars, and Bud Light and Target have felt a pretty significant or have seen a pretty significant financial reduction, if you will, because of the decision-making process that I think ultimately was contributed to by trying to appease and trying to placate the CEI, or the Corporate Equality Index. Now, I juxtapose that with our databases at 1792 Exchange, where, if the Human Rights Campaign tells you the more woke you are, the better, we actually tell you through our corporate bias rating, the more you focus on business, the better. And so that's kind of our flagship database. And I mention those databases because it does help inform customers. For instance, I share this story often. And she won't mind me using this.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Westler Media.
For Christmas.
If you found today's episode
she got it from Ace
Leave us a
Hardware.
review or rating,
and she called me the next day, and she was grateful that she got me that,
Aaron
because
Baer,
Ace Hardware
Mahan.
on our database has got a very good rating.
Hey, that's good.
Yeah, if you're a customer,
that's my go-to too. There he is.
Yeah, see, there you go. You're in good standing then. So if you're a customer, I mean, it can help inform your decision making on where you shop. If you're a potential or prospective employee, it can help you decide, like, do I want to work at Target? Do I want to work at any company? I mean, you can look on there and make that judgment. We've also got a database called our proxy database that helps people make a decision about investments. And then we finally, just recently put out, earlier this year, I should say, a database that identifies board members and tells you a little bit about their history and perhaps why a Target or a Bud Light makes the decisions that they make. I give you all that because those databases, in many ways, I think, inform customers and help people make smart decisions. And if you think about what happened with Tractor Supply, I mean, obviously, Robbie Starbuck, a social media influencer, and others got involved in that. And that's something, obviously, to note in that moment. But what I think is really important about that conversation is that Hal Lawton, the CEO of Tractor Supply, could have made a host of decisions. He could have ignored it. He could have, you know, uh, rebelled, if you will, against this sort of groundswell of people that were upset about some of the things that Tractor Supply was doing. But he decided instead to lean in and embrace change and to refocus or reorient Tractor Supply towards business and renouncing the corporate equality index or moving forward with filling it out and renouncing a lot of DEI policies. I think they're going to, finalize some of the commitments that they've already made, but ultimately he wants to get back to focusing on business and align himself with the values of his customers. And I applaud him for doing that. I mean, that took a lot of courage to make that decision. And because of that, we've now seen nine other companies make that decision. I mean, you mentioned Toyota, we've seen Coors, we've seen a hometown company, Brown-Forman, make that decision. Again, these are 10 bold and courageous companies that have decided to get focused back on business, not bend the knee to the far left or thinking you have to fill out a CEI or a corporate equality index survey to treat people well. Again, this is a special moment, and I'm hopeful that we're seeing the pendulum swing back to sanity and that we're going to see more businesses that make this decision. And I'm hopeful Nationwide is one of those that'll make that decision too.
Yeah, I think the nationwide aspect of this is important because I remember I had one conversation recently with somebody about this campaign and particularly pointing out that Nationwide had actually, in many ways was a more fierce political opponent to the family and to CCV and public policy because they were leveraging their brand, their very family-friendly brand for legislation like the Ohio Fairness Act that would require men be allowed in women's restrooms, right? And when a company like Nationwide shows up and advocates for that, one of the largest employers in Ohio, it has a lot more impact, especially in a state like Ohio that's very conservative, that has a lot of Republicans, than when Planned Parenthood or the ACLU shows up, right? When Planned Parenthood or the ACLU shows up, they're not going to get far with your average Republican. But when Nationwide shows up and starts, throwing their name around in these cultural fights, it's a massive issue. What's the impact you've seen of corporate America using their brands to push woke politics in America today, Daniel?
I mean, we obviously saw it with Disney down in Florida. I mean, they had the Florida legislature, and following the lead of Governor DeSantis, had a bill to protect kids from hearing about subjects and topics that they don't need to hear of, at such an early age. And Disney decides to go full court press on opposing that common sense pro-family legislation. And it is remarkable that you've seen, and again, this has largely to do not necessarily with the CEOs themselves, but the pressure that they feel from the left. And it is, I think, made things more divisive. There was a reason that in the 90s, Michael Jordan made the comment, when asked, why don't you engage on political issues? His point was, well, Republicans buy shoes too. And it was a clever way of saying that I don't want to inject myself into a political dialogue in a conversation such that I ostracize or marginalize half of the country. But that is what, because of the influence of the left, that's what we see a lot of organizations doing. And it's to the detriment of our society. It's to the detriment of the legislative process. Because you got these companies that are, multi-billion-dollar companies that are coming in and pressing their weight on the legislative process in a way that, again, is dividing as opposed to unifying. So my hope is that, if you got a corporation, if you got a CEO, their mindset is shifted towards, hey, we're gonna focus on producing the best and highest quality product that we can, as opposed to attaching ourselves to a partisan political agenda. And I'm hopeful that the decision to do that is based on common sense. But I think they need a little help along the way. And so part of that is having everyday folks engage in the process of being informed and understanding what public corporations are doing on a whole host of topics. And, a 1792 exchange, I tell this all the time. I say, we want to come to corporations with an open hand, not a clenched fist. We want to make sure our corporations are profitable such that if they're a public corporation, they're maximizing the return on investment to the shareholder, because again, our businesses should be about those high quality products and making sure that shareholders are getting a good return on their investment. I want them focused on research and development as opposed to social engineering. And I'm hopeful we're going to get back to that place here soon.
Yeah. It's funny. We've got Samantha here with us who helps us produce the podcast. And she's also been catching all the responses on our Nationwide's Not On Your Side campaign and sending them around. And I mean, you read these messages people are sending to us, employees at Nationwide Insurance, talking about how they're reaching out to us anonymously because they're afraid they have fear of retaliation, and how determined Nationwide seems to stand by their DEI activists and activities. And I think that's one of the things that, again, don't get me wrong, we'd love for corporate America to be God glorifying and looking for that out for the betterment of the country. But even if just getting, like you guys talk about, getting back to neutral, focusing on profit, what have you guys seen about how the Corporate Equality Index is actually dividing companies internally right now, and what it's actually doing to their employees on top of just harming their potential profits, like you saw with Target and Budweiser?
Well, what I often say to people is that the challenge that you run into with the Corporate Equality Index or the CEI survey is that oftentimes it elevates one group at the expense of another. And a lot of times, if you are a person of faith, you end up being the one that's ostracized because you feel like you can't be your true self at work because you have to bend the knee to a particular ideology. And I think that is not a place where we need to be. I think our corporate community needs to be welcoming to all, but without elevating one over the other. And if you think about it in the context of DEI, I mean, there's great case law now that deals primarily with admission standards in public universities. But a lot of legal scholars out there now think that what was talked about in those Supreme Court cases related to admission standards at public universities can very well be applied in the corporate context, meaning that you shouldn't have quotas that elevate one group over another, again, to the detriment of another group. I talk oftentimes about the idea that we don't need American businesses that are built on diversity, equity, and inclusion, i.e. quotas. We need American businesses that are built on merit, excellence, and integrity or intelligence, whichever you prefer. That's the way in which I think we need to move in terms of the model that is utilized by companies to make sure that we're treating employees well. Again, this is about making sure that everyone has an opportunity to be at the table and do not, if you are a person of faith, feel like you have to leave your faith at the front door of your business or of your employer, such that you can work there. That in every sense is not the American ideal on which we were founded. Obviously, religious freedom and the idea of being able to live out that faith is important as who we are as people, and we shouldn't have to sort of hide that when we go into the corporate context. And again, I think all of us recognize the importance of treating people well. And the mission should be to do so, but not to do it at the expense of those that might have a faith perspective.
It's been great stuff, Daniel. For our audience who wants to check out some of those databases you mentioned and learn more about 1792 Exchange, what's the best way for them to do that?
And I tell people to go to 1792exchange.com. Again, you can find out more about our databases, whether that's the corporate bias rating database that tells you how woke a corporation is or how good a corporation is at focusing on business, or the proxy database that helps investors make really wise decisions, or that final database I mentioned, which is what we refer to as the board bias database, that helps you understand and unpack as a consumer, as a prospective employee, sort of what's the thinking behind these corporations, who's making these decisions. That board bias database helps you unpack that information. So yeah, go to 1792exchange.com. I hope you'll do so. And feel free to reach out to us. We've got a way you can connect with us there via email, and we'd love to hear from you.
Well, and I'll just say too, real quickly, for those members of the Christian Business Partnership, the ones that are in the executive level membership, one of the things that the Christian Business Partnership team does here for you is you can fill out a survey of the various companies, B2B companies you work with, and our team will use the 1792 database to give a report to you about where all those companies are on your risk. So in your pipeline, from your CRM to your bank to your law firm, all of these different companies that you might be working with, we leverage the 1792 database to just let you know here's where your risks are right now. So it's a really amazing platform.
Well, grateful for you, Daniel, and thank you so much for joining us today on The Narrative. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Wessler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and David Mahan, and we'll see you next time on The Narrative.